Hello everyone, and welcome back to the finals of the 1971 candidate series. It's Tigran Petrosian versus Bobby Fischer. This is game 6, and I know that in the previous video of this series, during game 5, I told you that a year ago I already made a video on game 6, and that you're more than welcome to check it out, if you don't want to wait for me to redo the video. But in fact, the video I made was about game 7, so I never actually made a video on game 6. This is the first time I'm making a video on game 6, Petrosian versus Fischer, and the game you saw, as I saw many of you have seen it, was actually game 7. So as I said, I will be remaking game 7, but those of you who haven't checked it out after this video, you are more than welcome to check out game 7. I'll link to the description will be in the I'll link to the video will be in the description below. Also, it's a nice opportunity for you to check out how this channel evolved during the course of the past year. So, like we said, first game went to Fischer. Second game, Petrosian immediately retaliated with the white pieces and ended Fischer's winning streak. Then we had 3 very nice draws, 2 very combative draws, and 1 very quick draw that followed the game Spassky versus Petrosian from 69. And here we are at game 6. It's a very exciting game. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So let's dive straight into it. Petrosian has the white pieces here, and he opens with knight to f3. So a nice reti opening. c5 by Fischer, we have b3 and d5. So Fischer's response is very principled. When your opponent doesn't control the center with his pawns, you should always control the center with your own pawns. I mean, white will control the center, only he will do it with pieces, some hyper-modern ideas by Richard Reti, none other than. So okay, bishop to b2, we have f6. This is obviously one of the positions where f6 is actually fine to play. It's a counter to this powerful bishop, and also with this f6 move, Fischer prepares e5. We have c4, Fischer pushes the pawn, d4, we have d3, and now comes e5. So already you can see that if you're not a big fan of passive positions, you don't want to be white here. We all know Petrosian doesn't really care whether he plays active or passive positions. He can play anything, so he doesn't mind playing this. Okay, we have e3, knight to e7, bishop to e2, and knight e to c6. Knight b to d2 by Petrosian, bishop to e7, we have castles, and now e4, further closing the position. a6 by Fischer, and here it's time for you to decide what you want to do here with the white pieces. If you're like me, you're probably just gonna push the pawn and hope that something nice happens on the king side, but Petrosian is a gentleman, and he goes back with the knight to e1. A very nice move, as Petrosian here really finds a nice the core of the position. He sees that Fischer put all of his pawns on dark squares, and Fischer's dark square bishop isn't all that great. While on the other hand, this light square bishop is very powerful. So by playing knight to e1, Petrosian prepares the exchange of light square bishops. He wants to, eliminate Fischer's light square bishop and leave him with a bad bishop. And okay, Fischer continues his play on the queen side, b5, and we have bishop to g4. Bishop captures, queen captures, Petrosian achieves his plan, and immediately queen to c8. Fischer offers now a queen trade. Petrosian declines it. Trading queens here, it's not bad, but black controls more space. There's really no reason to do it. With moves like g6, f5, this dark square bishop can even come alive. So instead, queen back to e2. Knight to d7. We have knight to c2, and now comes rook to b8. We have rook to c1. Now, if something like b captures on c4 happens, then Petrosian was going to capture with the knight, which would give him a nice open c file for the rook. Of course, Fischer isn't interested in this. Rook f to c1. Now comes queen to e8. Bishop to a3, and now bishop to d6 by Fischer. Petrosian is kind of trying to get b4 out of Fischer, and then after bishop to b2, let's say a5, he wants to break open with a move like a3, or even close the position with a4, and then try to force Fischer to perhaps capture en passant. But this would never happen, so he would close the position and then transfer the game over to the king side. So okay, bishop to a3, bishop to d6 by Fischer, and now comes knight back to e1. G6, we have c captures on b5, a captures on b5, and now bishop back to b2. Knight to b6, and now knight e to f3. rook to a8, and now comes a3. Knight to a5, as now by playing a3 Petrosian did weaken the b3 square. Queen to d1, adding further protection to b3, and then now queen to f7, again increasing pressure to b3 and also preparing f5. We have a4, a captures, and now c4. This c4 is a very nice move. By playing this, Petrosian did create a nice passed a-pawn, but Fischer plays c4, and now as he controls c4 with two knights and the queen, it's a very nice move that forces white to recapture, because c3 is a threat Petrosian cannot allow. D captures on c4, knight a captures on c4, captures, and now queen to e2 with a double attack against the knight. There's no way of actually saving this bishop, so you know, you have to play something. Queen e2 guards the bishop, Fischer captures the bishop, we have queen captures, and now comes rook f to b8, attacking the queen. Queen to a2 offers a trade of queens, bishop to b4, queen captures, king captures, and now rook to c7 check. And Fischer plays king to e6. So now we have entered the endgame, and we have to see what we're dealing with here. Petrosian has a nice passed a-pawn, while Fischer has a nice passed d-pawn, but Fischer's d-pawn is also a protected passed pawn, which is much more important. Even though this is an outside passed pawn, a protected passed pawn is a better passed pawn. So Fischer is slightly better here, and it's a question if Petrosian will be able to protect his passed pawn. So okay, we have g4 here. Fischer actually invited Petrosian to capture on h7, but Petrosian is not in a rush to do this. First he pushes g4, not allowing Fischer to push f5. So okay, we have bishop to c3, Fischer attacks the rook on a1, rook to a2, and now comes rook to c8, offers a trade of rooks. Here Fischer actually invites Petrosian to capture on h7, and this probably would have been a very nice move. For example, if rook captures here, then you get rook to c4, attacking the passed pawn here. And then after a5 or something, you have to capture, because there's no way to protect the a4 pawn anymore. So after a5, captures, and now when the rook tries to get back into the game, you play bishop to b4. Rook to a6 check, king to f7, and now you will simply keep checking the black king. You give a check, then king moves, and now you simply keep checking the king, and now you have this g5 move. G5 move trying to further destroy black's pawn structure, but then black has to decide what to do. And the best move in the position is d3, but it doesn't give black all that much. For example, rook to a7 check, king moves, now you can simply keep checking the king, and after king finally attacks the rook, then you put the rook behind the passed pawn, and you can no longer push the passed pawn, as it's protected. So after captures, you can simply capture the d3 pawn, and it's a nice position for both white and black. But as this is move 33, and they haven't still reached time control, Petrosian was most likely down on time. He decides not to go for this complicated line, he decides to capture the rook. We have rook captures, and now a5. Petrosian starts pushing his passed pawn. Rook to a8, we have a6 now, and now rook to a7. Blockading the pawn, so Fischer doesn't allow Petrosian to push it any further, and also keeps an eye on the h7 pawn for now. King to f1. Now that everything has been done, Petrosian decides to bring the king over into the game. We have g5, king to e2, and now king to d6. Fischer does the same. King d3, we have king to c5, and now knight to g1. The knight isn't very useful on f3, Petrosian wants to bring it into the game via e2 to attack the bishop. We have king to b5, and now knight to e2, attacking Fischer's bishop. Bishop moves to a5, and now you can see that the a6 pawn will fall, as there is no way to defend it. So perhaps that line you've seen where Petrosian grabs the h7 pawn and in return gives up this pawn would have been better, because now Fischer will simply be up a pawn. So okay, rook to b2 check, Fischer captures, and now rook to b1. We have rook to c7. Now, this is a very nice move by Fischer. Rook to c7. You can't move the king. There's no way, nowhere for you to move the king. The rook is controlling the entire c-file, the bishop is slicing all the way here, and the pawn is guarding the e3 square. So you can never move the king, but you can also never move the knight. If you move the knight, then you allow rook to c3. So it's a very, very passive position for Tigran, and there's not much he can do here. He tries rook to b2, simply playing a move. Bishop to e1 by Fischer. He forces the pawn to come to f3. We have f3 and now king to a5. Fischer brings the king into the game. We have rook to c2, offering a trade of rooks, and here rook to b7 by Fischer. You don't want to trade rooks, even though you are, for example, captures, even though you're up a pawn. All of your pawns are on light squares. At one point you will push h3, and then your king is on a light square. You will simply move your knight back and forth wherever possible, and a dark square bishop and the king will not be able to force the white king off of a light square. So, of course, not trading rooks, rook to b7, and now comes rook to a2 with check. King b5, rook to b2 check. Now, of course, you don't want to move the king to allow the rook trade. You have to block with the bishop, bishop b4, and now rook back to a2. Fischer again plays rook to c7, and rook to c7 is actually a beautiful move. It's really a tricky move. For example, if Petrosian would offer a trade once again here, let's say rook to c2, then this seemingly harmless move would actually lose you the game on spot. But it's actually a very nice idea. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find the reason why rook to c2 loses the game. How do you punish this with black? So I will give it a couple of seconds for you to, try to figure it out, as usual. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are a brilliant endgame player. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, the move is rook to a7. Rook to a7, really a wonderful idea. The threat, of course, is rook to a3 check. The king has nowhere to go, and you can't block with the knight or the rook because the pawn is guarding c3. So what can you do here? Well, if you try to create a square for the king, for example, play rook to b2, so the king would have a flight square, it doesn't work, because simply rook to c3 check, a3 check, king moves, and now d3 check picks up the knight. King has to move, you lose the knight and the game. Another thing you could try, perhaps move the knight. If you move the knight, then you can move your king to e2, but this also doesn't work. Let's say knight to c1, rook checks, now you have to move the king, and okay, now the knight and the king are guarding the d3 square, so you cannot push the pawn, but you can play rook e3 check. King moves, and now comes rook to c3. You force a trade of rooks, and after captures, now you have an endgame that's completely winning for black. But, of course, you have to know that this endgame is winning to be able to go into this variation. For example, king e2, now you simply bring the king into the game, king moves, you attack the knight, of course white cannot afford this trade, you have to move the knight, then king comes closer into the game, and now it's all over as c2 and c1 are coming. So yeah, this rook to c2 would have been a terrible blunder, so Tigran tries rook back to a1. We have rook to c8 and now rook to a7. Again, a lot of activity for this rook, but there's not all that much to do there. Bishop to a5. Fischer now closes the file for this rook, so the rook can't go back. And now what do you do here? You can either capture the pawn, but capturing the pawn would have been very dangerous. For example, if rook captures on h7, then you get rook to b6. You prepare, you make some room for this rook so he can enter the game, and the bishop from b6 prevents this rook from coming back to a7. So let's say rook to h6, if there's nothing to do, you can at least grab another pawn, but it doesn't work. Rook a8, rook captures on f6, now it's Petrosian who would actually be up a pawn, but rook a3 check. King moves, now comes bishop check, king moves, now comes d3. Knight has to move, now comes d2, knight has to move, and now rook a1 check wins the game. King moves, queen comes into the game, and now queen b1 will be checkmate. So, after bishop to a5, rook to d7 was played by Tigran. We have bishop to b6. Again, Fischer prepares his grand entrance of the rook. Rook to d5 check, bishop blocks, and this was Tigran's idea, why he didn't capture the pawn, why he played a rook on the d file. Now the bishop is on c5, and Fischer will not be able to play rook to c3. So now Tigran can actually move the knight. So knight to c1, he tries to activate it via knight b3. Fischer blocks this, king to a4, rook to d7, and now we have bishop to b4, preparing. If rook a7 check, then Fischer can always, if rook here, then the bishop can block it. Also, knight has to move as it was attacked, knight back to e2, guarding c3, so king to b3, and now you can see how masterfully Fischer brought his king all the way to b3. That's quite a nice king march. Rook to b7, and now there's really not all that much white can do here. Rook to a8 was played by Fischer. And now there's nothing to do here. Petrosian simply decides to grab a pawn. But it's far too late for such things. It was possible some 30 moves ago, but now not so much. Rook to a1 by Fischer. An excellent move. Fischer here is preparing rook to d1. Of course, all of you can see that if Tigran, for example, plays something like rook b7, then rook to d1 will be checkmate. Again, bishop slices all the way here. The king now creates a wall against the white king, and the pawn is guarding the e3 square. Another thing, for example, if you try something like knight to g3 to create a flight square, it doesn't work. Rook to a2, now you threaten rook to d2 checkmate. Knight has to block, knight to f1, now you play rook to f2, and now you win the knight. There's nothing you can do here, because if you move the knight, again you get rook d2 checkmate. A very nice position for black. Petrosian tried the only thing he could now, knight captures on d4. He decided to give up a knight for 2 pawns. Captures, and here you do have 2 pawns for the bishop, but it's simply not enough. Rook to d1 check, king moves, now comes bishop check on c5, king to e2, rook to h1, not allowing this rook to move from the h-file. We have h4 by Petrosian, and Fischer simply ignores this. He brings the king into the game. We have h5. Petrosian now creates a passed pawn, but you will never be able to do anything with it. Rook to h2 check, king e1, and now king to d3. And here on move 66 is where Tigran Petrosian resigned, and game 6 also went to Bobby Fischer. So an excellent game, and it's really amazing. After winning first game and then losing the second, then after 3 draws, Fischer manages to win game 6. And what a battle it was, 66 moves. Why did he resign? Well, the king will simply come to e3 and start picking up all of the pawns. There's nothing you can do here. Whatever you do, let's say check, king e3, or even you block with the bishop, king moves, let's say you go for the f3 pawn. The king can't go up since the rook is cutting off the king from the second rank, and whatever you play here. Bishop e5 guards the rook, let's say rook b7, and now king captures on f3, and now all of the pawns will fall. So yeah, after this king to d3 move, Tigran resigned, and now the result is 3 to 2 in Fischer's favor. So like I said, I already made a video on game 7 about a year ago, so the link to it will be the first thing you will see in the description below. Feel free to check it out, as I will be making a remake, so if you really can't wait to see what happens in game 7. But yeah, that's it. I do hope you enjoyed it and that you're enjoying the Fischer series so far. I would like to thank Marco Zonenveld, Jose Diaz Singh, Glenn Sousa, Matthias Firek, and Mercury for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you soon, hopefully with another interesting video. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.